33% of you have already started using Visual Explorer. And so, maybe learning how to use quick calculations is just the new skill you want to build to learn how to really maximize your use of Visual Explorer. So you are all in good company, and we are looking forward to walking through how to use quick calculations with you today. So let's get started. We'll start by introducing ourselves. So my name is Jennifer Spoolma, and I'm the Customer Education and Enablement Manager here at Mode. So I get to work on things like this webinar series and Mode University and a bunch of different initiatives to help our customers learn how to use Mode and use it to its full capacity. And then we also have Johnny Kelly on today's webinar. Johnny, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Thanks, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. My name's Johnny. I'm a solutions engineer here at Mode. I help current customers and future customers find value in the product. So some of you may have seen me in the sales process or during your time as a Mode customer. So nice to see you, and thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you for joining. Thanks, Johnny. And then we also do want to highlight that next week we have another webinar about another webinar in our webinar series for Visual Explorer, and we'll be focusing on the topic of data-driven storytelling. So this is a very big topic, and we're really excited to discuss it with you and share some ways that you can apply data-driven storytelling best practices within Visual Explorer. So it is next week, February 15, and we would love to see you there. And Samara just sent a link in the chat where you can click on and register for that webinar if you're not already registered. So thank you for doing that, Samara. And then we also want to just highlight that we do have a bunch of other resources built out about Visual Explorer and ways that you can use it in Mode University. And so we have a quick start guide to Visual Explorer course. We also have practice field guides built out, and they actually walk you through the process of building out different visualization types, which is a really fun way to practice Visual Explorer. And then we also have some on-demand training. So Samara also sent the link to Mode University. She's on top of it. So you can access all of these resources there as well if you have further questions after our webinar today. So the agenda for this webinar is we're going to start with a quick recap about what is Visual Explorer. So of course, since we have kind of a mixed bag of attendees here with some who have never heard about Visual Explorer or used it and some that have, we want to just make sure we're all on a level playing field with understanding what it is we're talking about today. And then we'll get into a quick explanation of what quick calculations are. And then, of course, we'll spend the majority of our time on today's webinar actually demoing how you can use these different types of quick calculations within Visual Explorer. We'll be answering questions at the end, but also throughout. So if at any time a question does come up, feel free to use the Zoom question and answers feature, and you can type in your question, and we'll take a couple of breaks to do that Q&A, and definitely also answer some questions at the end as well. So let's start with a quick recap of Visual Explorer. Johnny, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, for sure. So for those of you who have never used the Visual Explorer before, at its core, the Visual Explorer is a flexible graphing environment. Just like how we have grammar in English that allows us to combine words to form interpretable sentences, the grammar of graphics, which is what the Visual Explorer is built upon, provides a rule set that enables you to configure your visualization in numerous ways. This flexibility is why the Visual Explorer is great for data exploration, whereas Mode's current quick charts are better for when you know what specific chart type you want, and they provide a quick way for you to create it. Another great benefit of the Visual Explorer is the customizability of the visualizations themselves. You can get more specific when it comes to formatting and coloring than you would with quick charts. So as we go through this, for those of you who haven't used the Visual Explorer, Jennifer is going to walk through, how to create a visual from scratch, and specifically what to click on in Mode to get to the Visual Explorer. But we'll focus a lot of our time today on quick calculations in the Visual Explorer.
Awesome. Thank you for that background.
Mm-hmm.
So then what are quick calculations? So quick calculations in Visual Explorer allow you to quickly, as the name implies, quickly apply an analytic calculation over your data within your visualization. So that means that you don't need to write any additional SQL code in order to create these calculations. The calculation types that we currently support are percent difference, difference, and percent of total. And these quick calculations can be added to any aggregated continuous field in Visual Explorer. And if you don't know kind of like what I mean by the aggregated continuous fields or how this will work, no worries, we're going to cover that in the demo in just a minute. But in addition to the calculation types that you're able to use with quick calculations, you're also able to specify the level and the direction in which these calculations are applied. For any of your aggregated continuous fields. So a lot of flexibility and just a lot of great functionality to improve and speed up your analysis without having to go back and write that additional SQL code. So before we get into the demo, Johnny, is there any kind of additional context you want to add here?
Yeah, for sure. So just as Jennifer mentioned, quick calculations are great for when you want to calculate, just like she said, the percent difference or, difference change over a period of time without doing this in SQL. So this is usually great for tables, as you can see here, but it can also be used in visualizations too. So previously in Mode's quick charts, you would have to do this using calculated fields or at the SQL layer, whereas in Visual Explorer, you can just click a drop down on your measure you want to quickly calculate and choose between a few different calculation options, which Jennifer will show you in the demo there.
Yeah, awesome. So let's get into our demo here. So we are going to be working off of this pivot table. And this is a pivot table that we actually walked through building out from scratch to its final state right here in a previous webinar. If you're curious or you want to learn how to build out a pivot table like this, I would encourage you to watch the recording of our Visual Explorer landscape webinar. And that is, Samara is also going to send the link for that. And if you just click that link, you can quickly grab the recording and watch that right away. So we're going to be working, from this pivot table that's already built out, so we can just focus our time on the quick calculation functionality. But in this pivot table that we're looking at right now, we're looking at quarterly sales by region, by account manager. So we have our quarters going across the top, and then our account managers, and each account manager's sales are broken up by region as well. So right now, this sales data that's populating all of the cells in our table is coming from this field right here. We have the measure of price dragged into our text layer, and it's calculated as the sum price, so the total sales. And so that's what's driving all of the values in our cells here. If we wanted to conduct a little bit more of comparative analysis to see how sales, performed over the quarters rather than just seeing the total sales for each quarter, then we could use the quick calculations and figure that out in a really quick and fast manner. So let's do that. So to find your quick calculations and use them, you'll just use the drop down on any of the aggregated continuous fields that you're working with. So how do you know if it's a continuous field? That would be any of your pills that are colored in green. And then if there's an aggregation applied, so right here we have the sum price, and so it's the total sales. So that's an aggregated continuous field, which means we'll be able to use our quick calculations. So when you use the drop down here, down towards the bottom, you'll see an option for quick calculation. And when you hover over it, it's going to open up an additional menu option where you can choose those different calculation options. So we can choose from percent difference, or percent of total. So we'll start by choosing the percent difference option here. And it's going to update our table. Where now, instead of seeing the value of the total sales for each quarter, we're actually seeing the percent difference going across the table. And so for Q1, for all of our account managers and all of our regions, we see this null value. But every quarter after that, we see a calculation of the percent of difference from the quarter previous to it. And so why it's working that way is from how our quick calculation is set up. So when we go back over here and our pill for the sum price, we're going to see that there's now this little asterisk icon, and that's indicating that a quick calculation is applied to this field. And then we can take another look at this. There's calculate using and relative to options showing up here. And the calculate using is telling us that the calculation, so the percent difference calculation that we applied is, it's being applied going across the table. And because it's going across the table, that's why that Q1 value is null for every region and every account manager. And then going across from left to right, the percent differences is being calculated for each cell. And that's because this relative to option is set to calculating the percent difference to the previous value. So the quarter that came right before it. If it was set to the first value, like which I'll show you just for the sake of example, now these percentages are being calculated based off of the Q1 value for each region and account manager. Let's go back to the previous value just because it makes a little bit more sense to calculate each quarter to the quarter before it. Let me take a quick break there because I know the screen can be a little bit small and there's a lot of like small little details. So Johnny, is there anything that you kind of want to add to where we're at right now, or anything that you've seen maybe people have questions about?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can see here, what Jennifer is showing is really visualizing data via changes, right? So as you can see, this particular table is showing percent changes over every quarter. So the reason why Jennifer just explained on the left side, there's this null value is because there is no quarter previous to quarter one. Quarter one's the first quarter. And then in the second column, quarter two, this is just the change between quarter one and quarter two under quarter two. So this is great for showcasing changes, right? So if you're thinking about your audience of who you're sending your reports to, if you want them to consume data via, these particular changes over time, for example, and percent changes, quick calculations are great for that.
Yeah, and I think that's like a great thing to highlight too, is thinking about your end users and your stakeholders. If you were to, put a table like this into a report, it's not going to be obvious to the person just viewing the report how these numbers are being, or how these numbers are being calculated. So example of where you'd want to probably add in some contextual text and wording to explain that, you're going across each quarter and comparing the percent difference in sales to the previous quarter, so that that could be understood. And so, yeah, we're going to show you a couple of different ways that you can perform your quick calculations, in a different way that you can calculate things so that it's not just in this table across. I see we're getting a couple of questions about why the Q1 is null. And as Johnny said, and I said a little bit earlier, that's just because right now the calculation that we're using is going from left to right across the table. And so Q1 is going to be null because there's nothing that this Q1 can be compared to previously in this data set. But I'll show you an example in our next demo where we'll just calculate things in a different way so it looks a little bit different. If you want to see how the that calculate using option transform your data, we'll do something different than table across. So if instead I wanted to do pane down, so right now we're doing table across, so it's going across the whole table. But if I choose pane down, now just to re-show you everything, we're still looking at the percent difference, but now it's being calculated where for each account manager, the percent difference being across each region. So now that null value is showing up in the Midwest for each account manager. Now, from an analysis perspective, this really isn't the most helpful analysis because it doesn't really make I mean, it could in a certain circumstance, but it's not a typical thing to compare different regions' sales to each other on a percent difference basis. And so what might be more helpful is if instead of calculating the percent difference, we chose the percent of total quick calculation type. So when we do this, now it's updating, and we're going to go back to calculate using pane down. Oh, it was just a second ago. And now this is a really helpful analysis because what we're doing is we're doing percent of total calculation by pane. And so in this case, each pane is each account manager. So we're going and we're going. So we have, and please definitely type in the Q&A if anything I'm saying isn't making great sense, because I feel like there's a lot of the same words being used. But we have each of our account managers, and then for each quarter, we can see that the percent of total sales that each region is contributing to their total sales by quarter. So for Q1, for Andy, the Midwest contributed 29% of sales, the Northeast 1.4%, the South 7%, and then the West contributed 62%. So all four of these put together equals 100%, which is their total sales for that quarter. So again, just to recap, the pane here is being determined by the account manager. If we change this to calculate using table down, when you use any quick calculation at the table level, it's going to cross over any panes that exist. So now you'll see that these Q1 percentages are much smaller, and that's because it's now going all the way down the table across all of the account managers, and then all of those values together would equal 100, because we're still calculating at a percent of total calculation. Jenny,
yeah, I think going back to what Jennifer said earlier, right? Thinking about your audience here is really important. So thinking about who you want these visualizations to be laid out in front of and how they specifically are going to be consuming this data is obviously going to determine which calculation you use here. So as Jennifer's kind of showing different ways that you can calculate these across, down, things like that, thinking about how these tables are being consumed and specifically how you want this data visualized is really important. And I think the second thing to call out too is this can all be done in SQL and calculated fields too. I think the great benefit of the Visual Explorer is you don't have to do those things. You don't have to go back to your SQL layer to edit any of these particular aggregations. You can do so using this drop down. So that's just another quick way to do it.
Yeah. Awesome. And then I think if there aren't any questions about this particular visualization or example that we're looking at, we can go into our as well. Are there any other questions that you've seen come up, Johnny?
Yes, one question came in about what if we had a dashboard level filter that excluded Q2? Would that Q2% change still calculate as normal or be null since Q1 is excluded via filter? So I just tried this on my own, and the visual excluded that entire column and then calculated the percent difference from Q3 to Q1 instead.
Awesome.
So I can type that. I'll type up that answer for Sam.
Okay. Awesome. All right, let's look at a different example here so we can talk through a couple of the more, I guess, complex quick calculation options that you have. So this is a different pivot table that we're looking at now, and it's using a different data source than the one that we were just looking at. And so this data is available in Mode's public warehouse in the community workspace. And so Samir, if you want to send that in the chat, you are more than welcome to copy this and run this in your own instance of Mode, and then you could follow along with us and see how this works yourself. So what we're looking at in this table is monthly sales performance by year and sales rep. And so the sales numbers that we're seeing here in this pivot table are they are the total sales of gloss paper orders, which is what we have over here in the sales data. So the sum of all of those gloss paper sales. So if we wanted to apply a quick calculation to determine the percent difference in sales between each month, then we could do that following the same process that we did. And so we'll use the caret dropdown, choose quick calculation, and choose percent difference. And in the same way that this worked in our first demo, we're going to see that by default, this is going across. And I just saw in the chat. So send the link. So we don't have a link to this actual report, but what Samira sent, that data that's queried, you can just copy that, put it into the SQL editor and run it, and then you'll get the same data that we're working with. Okay, so now we are seeing the percent difference going across the table. So in the same way that we saw it in the first demo. We're seeing the change in total sales by month and then restarting each year. So for 2014, we see all the change in sales, and then starting into 2015 and then 2016 for each of our account managers. But if, let's say that instead of doing this on the yearly basis, we wanted to see kind of the consecutive monthly sales comparisons from January 2014 all the way to December 2016, then we can do that by changing the way that our calculation is calculated. So we'll change this from calculate using table across, and we'll change this to pane across down. So this is an option where now what we're seeing is the direction that we're calculating the percent difference is going first across the pane, so all the way across the year 2014, and then it's going down a row to 2015, and then calculating across 2015, and then down to 2016, and calculating across from January to December of that year. You can kind of have a easy tell of how these calculations are starting and repeating by wherever you see that null value. So in this case, we're seeing that null values show up in January 2014 for each of our account managers. And that's, again, because our account managers are determining the pane that this calculation is applied to. And so we're going across and then down and across and then down for each account manager. And then, so what this is doing for analysis is showing us that consecutive month over month over that 3-year time span. We're still looking at the calculation of percent difference from the previous month, but I want to change this one more time so that you can see the difference. Quick calculation be put to use. So if we look at difference, now instead of seeing the percent difference from month over month, now we're seeing the actual currency difference from the previous month. And it seems like every time we change the quick calculation, it does kind of go back to that default of going table across. So if we wanted to continue looking at that pane across down as we had been, we'll just have to go back and choose that. And now we can see the sales difference going across from January 2014 to December 2016 for each of our account managers. Johnny, do you want to add anything before we talk about a couple of other options they have?
No, we just got a question in the chat here about non-tabular examples. I have one pulled up, but I don't know, Jennifer, if you were planning on walking through like a Visual Explorer visual, like visualization.
I wasn't, but if you would like to, feel.
Yeah, I can pull one up in a little bit.
Go for that. Yeah. So once we kind of wrap this example up, that would be great.
Cool.
Awesome. So the other thing that we want to make sure that you're aware of is not just that you can use quick calculations with visualizations other than pivot tables, which Johnny is going to cover, but also that you can perform these quick calculations on calculated fields that you define. So this is just another really powerful way that you can enhance your analysis, because you can create calculated fields within Visual Explorer, again, without even needing to go back and touching your SQL code. So in case you aren't familiar with creating calculated fields, we'll walk through creating one right now. So to create a new calculated field, you would just choose this Add New Field button, and then you can put in your formula here for how you want to calculate that new field. And I am just going to copy and paste one real quick. But what we're looking at here is we're going to create a new calculated field, which is adding the sum of our gloss paper sales with the sum of poster paper sales. And so we're going to then give this the name of total gloss and poster sales, just so it's real clear what we're looking at. And then we'll choose apply and close. And now when we're looking at our measures over here, we'll actually be able to see that the new calculated field that I defined is showing up in the measures. If you see this little, and it's probably really small on your screen, but there's a little equal sign next to the numbers sign here, and that's what's indicating that it's a calculated field that I've defined. And I can just as easily bring that over and switch out what's populating my table. So now I am using that calculated field in my pivot table, and I can go back and still perform all of these same quick calculations. So if I wanted to go back to doing the difference and calculating that in the pane across down, just as we did before, then we'll see it added. Right now, it's not showing up with that currency format. So if I wanted to update that to make sure that it's obvious that it's sales data and currency, I can change that by going to format, choosing my measure here, and then updating this to be displayed with the number format of currency. And then I can see that looking the way I want to. All right, and then I think the last thing that I wanted to show before I kick it over to Johnny is this grand totals down here and how this is being, or what's going on. So grand totals is a new feature release for Visual Explorer. It's very exciting. So grand totals will calculate the totals of all of your columns or rows just by the simple click of a button. So I already have it showing here, but if you wanted to add grand totals, you'd be able to select it from this toolbar, and you can see these check marks are showing that I have both my column grand totals and my row grand totals showing, but I can uncheck them and then recheck them. So for a column grand totals, when that's selected, it's showing the grand total for all of your columns, which is why we see it going down the list. And this, columns might not be the best choice for the data that we're looking at right now. It might be more helpful to see the row grand total in our example that we see now. And then if we scroll over to the right, then we can see the grand total for each of our rows. So with that, Johnny, do you want to add anything about grand totals or calculated fields before you show your demo?
Yeah, grand totals is huge. Highly recommend checking it out. That button at the top that Jennifer just showed, this is going to be a good useful tool for you all who want to show totals within your tables without having to do this in HTML anymore. So awesome stuff. Jennifer, do you mind if I share my screen real quick and we can talk through another? Cool. So I've got the same data set that Jennifer was showing, and I just built a quick visualization here just to show how you can use quick calculations in a graph or a chart. And what this is going to do is once I add a quick calculation to this chart, it's going to change how this is visually displayed a little bit. I'll go ahead and change the sum price to a quick calculation of difference over these quarters. So what's going to happen is there's going to be no data in Q1. Q2 is going to look a little jumbled. There's going to be some things going up, some things going down. For example, this Midwest is going to go down a little bit. The South is going to go up. So I'll just show you how you can use quick calculations in a visualization in Visual Explorer. So if you come to your measure, this continuous value here, the sum price, for example, you click this drop down and then you hover over quick calculation. You'll have the same options as you do in that tabular form that Jennifer showed. And as you can see, if I just click difference here, what's going to happen is my visualization is going to change a little bit. So I'll click difference. And as you can see, just like we kind of saw before, is the data from, or the revenue from Midwest went down a little bit from Q1 to Q2. It went up from the South region from Q1 to Q2 a little bit. And then it dipped again from Q2 to Q3. So this is another way that you can visually represent changes in your data sets in a non-tabular format, in a visual kind of format. So just one way that you can do this, again, if you come over here under your measure and click this drop down, you'll have access to the quick calculation here. You can also change this to calculate in different directions, as well as calculate the relative change too. So if we wanted to change this to first value, this is going to compare based on the first quarter. And that's it. Jennifer, anything else you wanted to add there?
I don't think so. Let me just see if there's any questions. Oh, okay. So we had a question about this being a different SQL query. Kate, this SQL query that Johnny just showed, and that was in my the first demo. We shared that in the visual landscape webinar.
I can share the dashboard again.
Want to share that dashboard real quick?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Send this to everyone.
Awesome. And then, yeah, we can open it up to any other questions that any of our attendees have. And while we're waiting for some questions to come in, we have a question for you. So Samara, would you mind launching that next poll? We just want to hear, from you what you found to be most valuable or most interesting from this presentation so far today. And while you're answering that poll, we'll be looking and starting to answer your questions. Johnny, have you seen any other questions come in that you want to answer?
No, I think we got to most of the questions.
Oh, awesome.
Really appreciate everyone attending today. This was a great session. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, Johnny just sent the link to that demo report. So you can see that as well. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on today's webinar. When we close down the webinar, you're going to see in your browser a survey is going to appear where you can, rate your experience on this webinar and leave any feedback. We've gotten really great feedback that we're applying and using to determine our next few webinars. So please share any of that feedback with us and we will put it into action. So thanks for joining us and we hope to see you next week.